All right, let's get into this. Okay, for a guy who says he's not a doomer, I do spend an awful lot of time talking about doom and gloom, all that fun stuff. Well, what can you do? All right, Canadian Prepper did it again. He came out with a really good, thought-provoking video. I think it was called something like post-apocalyptic, uh, the inner beast or something like that. I'll put a link down below if I can find it again. It was a good video. Like everything, even though him and I kind of take things from a different angle, he's a little more serious in tone than I am. I tend to goof around a little bit more, but I think there's a lot of stuff that we're very like-minded on, and like he says, he likes to hear different perspectives of things. So there's some things that I agreed with him in on that video 100%, and then something that's like, well, maybe a different spin on it. Maybe not necessarily disagree, but maybe looking at it a different way, and that's the way I'm looking at it. Now, some of the stuff he talked about the fennel kids. That was a very good point to bring up and stuff like that, and other things talking about how it'd be a breakdown of culture and then a rebuilding of tribalism, and I agree with that. There would be kind of I wouldn't say breakdown of culture. What I say is displacement of culture, because if we look back in history, it almost plays out the same way all the time, where there's always a group that's kind of they're affected, but they're not really affected. Things change, but it's like a dystopia rather than a utopia, where they're still going about their daily lives in the same places that they were, but everything's run down, and times got harder, but their lifestyle, it hasn't really got any worse, but it hasn't really got any better. And then other place, these would be like second world countries, for example. Other places it goes complete Mad Max, and like most of the planet right now, most people live in a Mad Max type of apocalyptic world. If you live in the Middle East, you live in the apocalypse. You know what I mean? It's just, but yet, for example, we'll use Syria as a perfect example. There are still places in Syria where you could probably still vacation, believe it or not. You know what I mean? As crazy as things are going on there. So one side of the country might be completely in shambles, and the other side, although I don't recommend vacationing in Syria at this current time, but you get the idea. Um, so different people get affected a different way. I don't think we'll ever, no matter what the circumstance, it would have to be an extremely bizarre circumstance to see total 100% societal collapse. And here's why. A societal collapse at large in mass numbers, definitely been done. Argentina's collapsed what 4 times in the past 5 years. There you go, societal collapse in a nutshell. But yet things still kind of hold together. People don't necessarily go off the deep end. Other places that Tunisia in 2009, it's collapsed. Well, Tunisia is still on fire. You know what I mean? So different places will be affected differently. We also have to look at what. The definition of what collapse actually is. If we're talking total societal collapse, taking it to the extreme, that means you don't even communicate with your own family. For whatever reason, everybody is on their own. It's like, think of it like a gigantic Etch-a-Sketch. Everybody's picked up, shooken, and just dropped off in the middle of disarrayment and bizarro world, and surrounded by Mad Max and weird tribalism and stuff like that. For that to happen, again, smaller communities will tend to tighten up right away. We can use a lot of stuff out of medieval history to see how the world may progress. For example, people usually inside the castle walls live almost either if unless you're under a really brutal dictator, they usually live some sort of a small, very close knit type renaissance. If we look at castle to castle, if you're under, was it Edward the Long Knives or Richard the Long Knives, or James the Long? I can't remember which king it was. That was so brutal in England. Anyway, he was just a complete utter. And there was a few of them. It's like you couldn't get outside the castle walls. That said, for most places, again, inside the castle walls, whatever metaphor you want to use, that be small town, small community, whatever kind of, wherever that moat kind of, keeps people in together. I think things like that pull together right away. You could almost call that planting the seed of tribalism. Example, Ice Storm, 2008, or sorry, 1998. Everybody in my town pulled together. People went and checked up on the elderly, stuff like that. Now, food collapse, that might be a different story. Now, his theme was more along the lines of who cares how we really get there? But when we get there, what are you capable of? What are you going to do? And he did bring up some experiments that I had talked about before of what people would be willing to do and how easy it is to manipulate people into doing things that, well, the point is that we already do that now. Uh, like, I mean, you think government soldiers and stuff like that go to another country because somebody told them, well, our leaders told us these people are bad, so we have to go kill them, and they don't question it. You know what I mean? So like we're already doing that. It's just it's a different, again, utopia versus dystopia. It's kind of a frame of mind when you really think about it. It's all dystopic. To pick your soldiers up and put them into another country and just start slaughtering people in the name of insert ism or whatever form of aggression it is. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day. Arguing the semantics of being eaten by an alligator or a crocodile when you only need to focus on is that you're being eaten. And a lot of people do get kind of caught up on that. And history does kind of show that it's always the same thing. Huge flourishing society typically takes about 80 years to flourish. Once it flourishes, it starts its rapid descent into either economic failure. This goes from Rome right on to now. And what ends up happening is at some point when the economy gets so bad, you go to war somewhere. Now, the question is, do you go to war with your own people? Or does your nation pick up a war against a neighboring state or what have you? That type of thing. But the real thing, that recipe doesn't really matter because the point is you're going to go to war. It's just against what, So that's the theme. That's the lineage of doom, so to speak. It kind of works in that kind of manner. So that type of thing. Yeah, I guess we kind of agree there. Where I think we kind of disagree is analogy when he talked about race, talked about gender roles, and he talked about what else did he talk about? Basically identity. I agree on a lot of the points, but I'll put a different spin on it. So it's not that I'm disagreeing, I'm just looking at it from a different point of view. Identity. We'll start with that one first because, yes, the person who's the Wall Street tycoon now in a WHTF situation, if he's still thinking in that mentality, he's nothing. A millionaire is going to be nothing when there's no food around. Money isn't worth anything now. It's just people have grown used to the paradigm of using it for barter and trade. But you take, for example, yeah, the royal princess of now could be the floozy of the future if people lose faith in a paradigm. It's like all of a sudden there is no wealth and nobody has any wealth. Then you have to use your own assets. So the oldest profession in the world being prostitution. I'm sure some women will do better than others, but in general there's probably going to see a spike in that. Then of course you have your other things such as and this goes back to the classism. Once the classism is erased, yes, I agree. Who knows what they're going to do? Because it's like anything. You could be a millionaire driving around your sports car, but when you get a flat tire in the middle of the road, in the middle of nowhere, you're now on your own. You know what I mean? Like that's the type of thing. Then what do? Do you sit there and rot and decay until somebody goes by, or do you fix the tire yourself and see what you're made out of? Providing you know how to do that. Most people do, but you get the idea. This is you could take these scenarios into any kind of rabbit hole you'd like. Find what works for you. Fine, but I do get the idea. Yes, classism will exist in a different way. The social order will have a shift, kind of like a wave hitting a dike and then bouncing back and going back out into the ocean, where it's just switched. It's still the same wave. It's switched into a different direction. So the person that's the handyman, like he said, the person that's the baker, the person that's the tin banger, blacksmith, etc., these people all of a sudden become hyper valuable. For example, if you were a blacksmith and a good blacksmith, in medieval times, and you could create a sword, for example, that had the perfect flexibility and didn't break in battle. All of a sudden, you became so valued to the king that if the castle was taken, they would kill you just so your knowledge could not be passed to the enemy. That type of thing. So yes, resources could be, but it could be. Yes, that complete switch where the guy who has the superficial job now that's living the high life will not be living the high life because his values and services are no longer needed, and it switches like that wave hitting the dike and going back out to sea again. Now, again, it's the same wave, it's just somebody else is riding it in a different direction. So hopefully that's a good analogy. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but you get the idea. Now, with that said, with the classism breakdown, you could say yes, technically the societal will break down. One thing he touched on was the attractiveness of women and something like that. That everything's artificial now. Men are artificial now. Women are artificial. We use artificial things to bolster our status. But here's the kind of a little bit of a rub on that, because the inanimate object, whether in today's society, having a say ultra high performance sports car is a status symbol in this country. But let's say you go over to a more tribalistic country where having a big bone through your nose might be the better status. But at the end of the day, it takes modification of either behavior or assets to impress upon the general populace that you have an elevated status. So it still comes back to that basic, whether we look at it as a superficial in terms of here, they may look at it as superficial over there. They say, well, it's like he didn't even kill that big brontosaurus himself, and it wasn't even him who put the bone in. It's probably not even real bone. So we look at it that people over there are living so realistically, and that we don't. But you can't really look at it like that, because if we're just going to go to the core of the psychology of it, the guy with the ultra sports car and the money is doing the same thing as the goat herder in the Middle East who says, I am very wealthy because I have 92 goats and you have 3. And in these tribal areas, this is, it's kind of funny, but it's kind of not. But in a sense, yeah, a guy who has, that's a form of wealth, is owning a lot of goats. If you live in Kazakhstan or someplace like that, you might be a hard labor, but you got so much land that your land and your goats and stuff like that become your wealth. Now to us, we look at that and say, oh, that poor guy over there, but over there he's like, I am working my fields and I am a king. You know what I mean? Like, and people there is like, oh, he's really wealthy. He has like 18 goats. You know what I mean? So it is the perception, yes, but the value of it in translation is the same. It's a status. So, and this is where I say you don't see a breakdown of culture. You see cultural displacement, or a different form of it. But that same tribalism, that same classism will still exist. If we go as far back as the Roman Empire or even ancient Egypt, it don't matter. There's always going to be classism. There's always going to be a tribalism. Kind of even modern day selfie culture is a tribalistic thing. Facebook is a tribalistic thing. People might not view it as that because it doesn't look organic. It looks modern. It looks whatever. But in the end, it is a form of tribalism. I'm a part of this group. And preppers, like you said, that will go away because everybody's going to have to prep or die. But I don't think it will go away because the actions won't go away. The people that will be prepping now will still be in that mindset once it comes. They'll be like, okay, well now I gotta prep even harder because I'm in, I gotta, count my eggs and stuff like that, even manage things even better because it's tougher. But if we were to switch it back to the 1800s, we would call these people homesteaders. So there's really not that much of a cultural shift as you would think. It displaces into a different dystopic version of itself, kind of like almost like an alternate reality or an alternate universe of itself. So that's the way I look at it. So what's that famous saying? The more things change, the more they stay the same. It's just the concept of it. I think people will just their self-personification of themselves changes. So in the office building, I'm the guy who does nothing. All I do is organize, the papers to go to this desk, that desk, that. Post-apocalyptic, I'm the super guy who makes sure that prepper can get in contact with that prepper, and that prepper can get. So he's doing the same job. He just doesn't realize it. He's just taking those skills that he or she already knows, and just manifestate it into something else. So I think you're going to see a lot of that because, again, once you get above the age 25, it's really hard to teach an old dog new tricks. It really is. Hence why, the whiz-bang generation is good with computers, the younger generations, and us older, we're a little more stupid on it, But at the end of the day, there's things that you do well. And those skills is the core of what you're going to do well in the WROL, SHTF, Apocalypse, whatever it might be. So I'm looking at it in a different way because I look at what happens like during an ice storm. The guys that are really, really, the 1998 ice storm, we were out of power up here for like 3 weeks, covered in freaking ice. You know what I mean? It sucked. But it was the same thing. The guys that were hard workers in their jobs, they couldn't travel and they had to stay home or whatever. Well, they just they were the hard workers in the community by shoveling, moving generators around, that type of. So they didn't really change their type of way of life. Like, on the surface, yeah, they're doing something different than what they normally do, but they're not really doing that much different. They're still laboring. They're still organizing the same way they normally organize. And I think that will be the majority of people. Now, that said, that's where I wouldn't say I disagree with them, but where I have a different spin on it. So, like, but I do agree. Yes, there will be people who will be utterly, panically lost. Particularly, I mean, could you picture with the selfie generation, as you can call them? And I'm not saying this as a bad thing. It's just it's a different paradigm. Kids 50 years from now are going to look back on the kids today as like, well, look at the poor technology they had. They had nothing. You know what I mean. That's the way they're going to look at it in the future. But at the end of the day, it's like, picture Facebook's out for a week. What happens to everybody? Well, the people that are sociable on Facebook suddenly start go visiting people. You know what I mean? Or they telephone or whatever. They don't really change their mannerisms. They just find a new way to manifest it. So that said, if we're talking post-apocalyptic Mad Max kind of world collapse, that you're going to see the same people that are active in the community now just find a new niche. Doesn't mean they're going to like it. It doesn't mean it's going to be easier like that. I'm not saying that it's going to be a utopia. Dystopia more comes to mind than utopia, but the idea is that the characters you can change the spots, but a leopard's a leopard. You know what I mean? Like it's the same. The same people will do the same things. Which brings me to kind of his next point on the status of people, what's perceived wealth. And one thing he brought up, and this does ring true to the medieval period. Maybe he knew about this, maybe he didn't. I'm assuming he did because he brought it up. That people that are fat, okay, maybe not necessarily fat, but like large plump people will be probably viewed as people who are wealthy because right now, okay, we like sleek, thin, tight, toit like tiger, that type of thing. But back in medieval times, somebody who had a little bit of meat on their bones, it was a sign of wealth. And in fact, the French used to call the British beef eaters because they ate beef all the time because they were the wealth, and they were envious of that. And one of the things they used to call them was beef eaters. So that's where that term came from, beef eater. That was, the wealthy. But not everybody in England could afford beef, you know what I mean? But it was just where it was perceived that, okay, those fat people over there are wealthy, they're a bunch of beef eaters, I'll proudly eat my twig, that type of thing. Better be some of those beef eaters. But that was something that women that were actually, like he said, were slightly more plumped, were actually viewed as more wealthy, actually more desirable, because it was like, well, if they're well fed, then they're wealthy, So that could revert to itself. But there's another problem here that we have to look on. Going on the superficial thing, I'll finish up with the women. He's saying, like with the nails and the hair and stuff like that. And women's role in society would probably go back more to nurture than this kind of anything a man can do, a woman can do better kind of mentality, or that feminist thing. I agree, yes, because in the post-apocalyptic collapse type of world, political correctness will not be there to save anybody, nor will there be any government there to get recourse. Therefore, this again builds back into tribalism again, where the women will actually revert back to the safest areas they can, which is usually going to be behind the most barbaric of men. Maybe not necessarily the most cruel of men, but the most barbaric of men. The men that are willing to, get the job done. That type of thing. Not in a kind of well, it goes back to like tribalism. You're going to have your braves. You're going to have your chiefs. You're going to have your elders. You're going to have your spiritual guide. You're going to have the women that like in the native communities. The women there, they run the society. We're talking like a couple hundred years ago. Sure, they ran the society while the men were keeping the borders secure, hunting, doing the dangerous stuff like that. But without the women at home taking care of the children, chewing up the sinew, doing that type of stuff, the men wouldn't have gotten anywhere, and the women would not be protected if it wasn't for the men to go out. So the tribalism actually works very hand in hand. It can't work by live together, die alone, that type of thing. And this is one of the things that a lot of people, nowadays, because we don't need each other as much because we have technology to fill the gap. But when that technology is no longer protected in a sense of government or whatever, or police or military, whatever it might be, then at that point, yes, you have to find alliances that keep you safe. And that's tribalism. That's where the tribalism is going to step in big time, because you can't walk around alone with enemies everywhere. Uh, the Huron and the Algonquin, fought each other for probably 1,000 years. Nobody knows how long that grudge goes back, and the reason why the tribes survived is because these tribes absorbed other tribes, in the Great Lakes areas and stuff like that, and they absorbed other tribes rather than being conquered. So these alliances, yes, sometimes the enemy of my enemy becomes my friend. That is true. But like anything, you go where you're going to fit in the best, but you're also going to go where it's going to be the safest. And at the core of every human being, with the exception of what I'll get into is the sickos that will be out there, most people crave safety, they crave stability, they crave normalcy, and that will always manifest itself in any time period in history. Whether you're talking about Vikings, they had a family-connected life. Talking about native tribes, they had family-connected life. We're talking about kingdoms pick a tribe anywhere. Pick a tribe anywhere. Whether even in islands like Japan, everything had its tribalism. Dynasty here, dynasty there, whatever. It's all tribalism at the end of the day. Why? Because you're going to go where you're most stable, right? That said, the fringe elements, well, this is where the tribe strengthens or weakens, because you have to do basically pest control to keep your assets safe. So the women of your tribe, without them, your tribe can't go further. And believe it or not, women probably won't like hearing this, but many of them will be bartered and traded. This happens today. It still goes on today. Again, most of the world doesn't live, the world we live. We are very, as many problems as our country has, it's nothing compared to other countries. I mean, the slave trade is as well alive and well today as it's ever been in Africa. The Middle East, same thing. I mean, these things happen, and also too for statuses of wealth. Your son marries my daughter, and we'll share kingdoms, that type of thing. And arranged marriages, stuff like that, it becomes tribal. Now, as far as the women independence thing, again, women listening to this probably won't like to hear this, but it won't last. Even if they were to form a tribe of like Amazon type, like you'd see in the movies, it still wouldn't work. Why? Because you can't have one without the other. It just, it won't work for a lot of reasons. And this comes back to the sickos, the fringe elements, the ones that would love the Mad Max world. If you look at, for example, in the Middle East, some of the, the deranged crazies that are running around there, those guys aren't running around there deranged and crazy. They're enjoying themselves. They're having fun. Keep that in mind. Some people welcome it. Gangs thrive in dystopia. Anywhere there's chaos, gangs will rule. Gangs are just a different form of a tribe. Now, that said, the fringe elements, the serial killers, the narcissistic, what you call Marquis de Sade types, these type of people, if there's no repercussions for their actions, what's to stop them from doing what they're doing? Well, there's only one thing that's going to stop them, is a, number one, well kind of grouped tribe that watches out for people like this. And of course, justice will be swift for people like this anyway. And I don't think many of those people will last long. Which brings me to the fennel kids that he was talking about, which, yes, we see these today. These are basically orphan kids that usually end up child soldiers and stuff like that. You can call it, I won't use the scientific terms, I'll keep it really simple. Monkey see, monkey do. You grow up around thugs, you'll become thugs. Penguin effect. When the first penguin jumps off the iceberg, the rest follow. And that's kind of what these, the psychological debilitation of these, I guess you'd say, fennel kids. They're like wild cats. They can never be rehabilitated. They're not something that, like, they live in a total different mindset, instinctive and reactive more than almost like an animal-like instinct, where they just react to things. They don't actually plan for a future. Today, tomorrow, yesterday is kind of a blur, where it doesn't really matter. It exists now. So yeah, survival of the fittest kind of comes to mind, and just to learn what you can to adapt, and that type of thing. These people would be very, very dangerous. Why? Because they would be basically operating on instinct, almost like primitive man. The downfall to them is that, again, teaching an old dog new tricks doesn't necessarily mean you have to be that old of a dog. sometimes the easiest way to catch a predator is, you know, by using the bait that it would come after. And that's one of the things that may happen. And that will cleanse a lot of those people, because those people, they'll never be able to group with anybody. And even if they do get into a group, the groups will be, they might get kind of large, maybe a couple of hundred in force, but against an organized, well thought out group that would be onto them, there's going to, you have to understand, yes, there's going to be as many sickos out there as you could possibly imagine. But we're now going to have to argue the semantics of, again, the crocodile versus the alligator eating you. The thing is are you going to be taken out by some sicko who just wants to torture you to death? And God knows what they're going to do to the women. You could use all your, all the scary analogies there. Or are you going to be taken out by somebody who thinks you're an evildoer? In other words, mass vigilantism. So these are you don't want to be caught between the world of the sicko and the vigilante, because the vigilante is just going to go out, well, snipe people for the, that looks like a guy who's, shady or whatever. And, he's probably one of those whatevers, and then that type of thing. So, like everything in nature, eventually things will balance. Because I think the initial gets pretty bad, but even if in food scarcity, people learn to not move around. And this is something I've always talked about: is moving around is what's going to get the good guys shooting at the good guys. We're the good guys going around looking for resources, and all of a sudden we see these other armed guys coming around the corner. Well, they're hostiles, and the other guys are doing the exact same thing. In other words, if you don't have to move, don't. Stay put. This is where rural areas tend to have a better kind of grip, because we have a bit more of a buffer between a collapse and, I mean, if we're told tomorrow that's it, the banks are closed, well, people in the city are going to be, smashing the bank windows and doing stuff like that. And if you're caught in between that, you could be, bad things are going to happen to you. People up in the countryside, yeah, they're probably going to say, okay, well, now what do we do? And then, okay, well, we need to go visit cousin Jeb and come up with a plan, for food. What are we going to do? Well, the mindset's completely different. It's going to revert to a kind of, okay, we need to become self-sufficient right away. That just because typically in the countryside we're used to more power and stuff like that. It doesn't mean there's not going to be bad people here. There, in every batch. But you can get the idea that barter and trade takes place differently. The rural areas will probably again become more autonomous. That's mostly likely what will happen. Again, it would have to take a really bizarre event for everything to break down all at once. But going with the argument that it did, again, the tribalism will still establish itself at some point. As far as cultural values and stuff like that, or individual values, I don't really think the individual really changes that much. Their core values will stay the same. Doesn't mean they're not going to do bad things. What will change is how they justify things. So the guy who walks around, thinking, okay, well, I'm not going to hurt anybody, but if you mess with me, I'm going to put 3 in you. Kind of will be justifying it as well. As long as you're not messing with me, you're okay. The other guy who said, well, if anything you have is mine, well, then again, same thing. He's probably already thinking that way now, and the psychopath types. Now, as far as skills and stuff like that, again, I think people just displace the skills they already have. They don't really change the skills they have. Either they're good at something or they're not. They just because everybody has a learning process that's individual to them, and they'll just basically learn a different way. Now, as far as the race thing, I got to bring that up too. I agree with him and I disagree with him, and here's why. I believe, yes, I actually don't think much changes on that front at all. The people that get along with people now will probably be more reasonable. It doesn't mean everybody's going to trust everybody. Obviously, trust is the first thing that goes during these things, and that's what leads to everybody kind of separating from each other, right? Is the distrust. Now, as far as one thing he said was that the most hardcore racist, if he was dying of thirst, would still take water from somebody of a race that he hates the most. Yes, if we were to use an ancient time kind of correlation, yes, Gauls would, or Romans would take the flask of a Gaul, if they were thirsty enough. You know what I mean? They would share. They would find that commonality. I don't think that changes much. However, the race issue does come back to tribalism again. In fact, in this day and age in Africa, I mean, being an albino black is well, technically you'd be white, but being an African albino could mean you get eaten because of your color of your skin. You know, you have to understand there's still people in the world that are coming from a mentality, okay, of superstition and stuff like that. That's already here. That like that. That's what we're talking about is going back to what reverting to their level that they're already at now. So for them in a collapse, like okay, you're telling me I don't have money that I already don't have. You're telling me I don't have food that I don't already have. Big deal. To them it's like they're already living it. So you tell them, okay, well, Canada, the United States, England, and Europe, Australia, and all these countries collapse overnight. To somebody in the middle of Africa, they're like, well, I already live off the land. They'll adapt. You know what I mean? They'll find their footing. So to that, the thing is we're coming from a different area of mentality, sure, because we're not used to that. And the people who can't adapt will die. Period. So if they, can't get beyond the idea that okay, the bank, collapsed and they have no more money and you can't use money anymore. You have to barter and trade things, or you have to hunt, or you have to do this, or you have to do that. Yeah, sure. There's definitely people that will not be able to absorb the mental shock of that. Most people probably will, just because it's like, okay, well, this sucks, they're going to complain about it, but at the end of the day it's like, well, I'm not that well off anyway, so it's not that far to fall. It's the people that I think that have the furthest to fall will have it the hardest. But these also the people that, depending on how they grew up, if they grew up in a very competitive family that all they learned was how to take, these people become extremely dangerous in these doomsday kind of scenarios. But on the other hand, if you have people that are used to always ruling, they just find a different way to rule. So again, the job doesn't change. Instead of being a head of a CEO of a big corporation, they now run the local gangs, that type of thing. So again, the parallel, it just goes from utopic to dystopic. It's the same. You'll find your same job. You know what I mean? Or similar. Again, it's not an absolute. Obviously, everything I'm talking about is not an absolute, but I think in the general terms of things, this is what we would see. The other thing is that particularly with the race one, is that again, this comes back to bonding tribal for peace. Again, let's just use natives. Like apples to apples comparisons. Natives don't consider the Inuit natives. You know what I mean? Like they're completely separate. But if you look at them, really, there's not that much difference between them. Ethnically speaking, right? But the thing is that the Crow and the Inuit, for example, never got along back in the day. They warred for a long time, but at some point they had to make peace, and the only best way to make peace is to intertwine cultures. And you can learn Europe, Vikings, for example. Look at Vikings; they went everywhere, they conquered everywhere. But what the Vikings did is they absorbed culture. They didn't they displaced culture a little bit, but they'd go conquer it and then absorb it. And absorb it into their own culture. That's what the Vikings did. So in that kind of multicultural kind of aspect, I don't think that changes. That said, you still have your tribal wars. And one of the things that was thought back in the day, I mean, in a lot of places where that people of color, for example, would be, they were viewed as something different than human. And I'm not necessarily talking about blacks, but even Arabs, like that type of thing. They would view, the Ottoman slave trade. They would view white people as something different. They wouldn't even view us as people. They would view us as some sort of, okay, we're humanoid, but we weren't considered human beings. Hence why we ended up in the slave trade there. So I mean, there's enough evil to go around at any time in history. So that. Why would if we haven't changed now, why would we change it in the future, right? So I think yes, there would be people would probably overcome a lot of biases to coexist peacefully. But I think I see a dystopic. I don't think we could revert further back than the 1800s in mentality, for myself, unless something happens. The only way that could going back with the fennel kids. This is the key. If we look at like the Mad Max, I think it was Beyond Thunderdome with the tribe of kids. That could only let's say there was like a disease that killed off adults, and then all of a sudden you had all these kids that say from the age of say 4 or 5 that live, but they never had an education system or anything like that, so there was never any old world connection. And hypothetically, we'll say that they grow up trying to figure it out for themselves. Well, again, they go back to kind of like the dawn of man, so to speak, kind of mentality, that kind of tribalism, which science-wise, they would still probably advance pretty quick. Why? Because all this stuff they would find. Eventually, someone's going to figure out how a ratchet works. Eventually, someone's going to figure out, you know, what a battery does. You know, even if they don't know what it is, if they play with it long enough, maybe that generation, what 3, 4 generations down, somebody figures it out, right? So they're not starting from sticks and stones or Bronze Age. They're not starting from that type of thing. They've already have stuff to look at to give them ideas. Where if we're talking, you know, Dawn of Man, they discovered bronze by accident. They discovered, iron by accident. Iron ore. They discovered it by accident. The first one to figure out how to nap a flint was probably by accident, or saw a rock break and say, "Hey, I bet you that could be," or cut himself on it and said, "Hey, I bet you that could be used as a tool." So we're already starting off at the advantage of that. If we were to, society were to collapse fully today, we've already got people that are educated. And an example of this is actually the fall of Rome. Yes, there's that whole Dark Ages and stuff like that. Nobody knows what happened there, but there's still, the thing is that the people after that were still speaking and writing and stuff like that. Not everybody. Again, a handful of people, and it shows in every medieval period where a handful of people enjoy a renaissance. A very small few people. The rest outside the castle walls live in misery and stuff like that. But even at that, even it works fairly well for most people because they establish, again, tribalism without, okay, this farmer watches that farmer, everybody knows about everybody, that type of thing. You know your neighbor, you work with your neighbor, you respect your neighbor's boundaries, that type of thing. And feuds are disputed, like, the duel becomes the new Supreme Court justice is the duel. In fact, they should have never gotten rid of the duel, in my opinion. Save a lot of problems nowadays. But anyway, who knows? Next to that, the idea of, again, people reverting to, with extreme hunger, reverting to cannibalism and stuff. Yes, I do see that because if we look at any country where there's mass starvation, cannibalism does usually appear in some form, but it never appears in large form. That's one of the things, no matter, Rwanda, we'll use Rwanda, the mass starvation's there. Very little cannibalism actually ever exists there, although it does. Very few people, no matter, most people would choose to die rather than do that. It's not that people are morally, it's just they can't grasp that reality of eating another human being. They can't do it. It's psychologically impossible for them to grasp it. Doesn't mean it can't happen. However, if you grew up in a culture of that, maybe, you go to Papua New Guinea, there's cannibalistic tribes there that are still cannibals today. However, they just can't quite get away with it anymore. But, they do like visitors from time to time, and sometimes you never see those visitors anymore. I don't know where they would go. Burp. But yeah, so in some places, yeah, cannibalism is considered normal. In some places, I believe it's in Papua New Guinea, where they actually, it's kind of funny. It's kind of funny. It's kind of not. They have a form of cannibalism. What they do is one tribe will go seek out the shaman of the other tribe and basically kill him and eat him to get his powers. But then once people know that he has the other shaman's powers, then other people try to kill him and eat him so that they can get his powers and the other guy's powers. So yeah, like I don't know. I laugh, I cry. You can't make this stuff up, but it's just kind of, it's the belief system that they have. But again, these people never came into the first world in education and stuff like that we know of today. And starting with that, even as of today, the first person that discovers a library and learns how to read in a post-apocalyptic world becomes a superpower in his own mind. Book of Eli. Have you ever seen that movie? When the guy's sitting there, he goes, "Well, it's just a book," and the guy yells, "No, it's a weapon," because it's a belief system, right? And that is true. Knowledge is key. Hence why many democides, Pol Pot, for example, executing people who wore glasses because there was a chance that they could read, and that would be a threat to the communist system at the time. And if they could read, they could overthrow the government. Yada yada yada. So remove the threat. So people, ditch their glasses, that type of thing, out of fear. But forget how many millions died there, like 20 million or whatever. But you get the idea. These things happen. So knowledge could be something that becomes taboo. Keep the masses stupid so you can rule them. But we're already starting off. Even most people nowadays can read fairly well. Meaning, okay, the power's out. Let's say a massive EMP hits. Well, how long is it before people start building their own power stations? What, 2 weeks? You know, how long is it before you know a major power station comes back online? What, 6 months? You know what I mean? Like people, we've already got the technology, and even if it just gets destroyed, there's enough people around that the only thing that I think can really take us down is basically disease, in that sense, or contamination of area, but like a nuke going off or something like that. But even with that, like most of the stuff he talked about, I really enjoyed the video. It was really good, and I usually enjoy his videos anyway, even if I haven't been able to watch a lot of them lately. But that one I thought was really good because he did touch on the instinct level of people when they're in extreme duress. But the thing is when we look around the world, where do we see that? Again, there's enough apocalyptic places going on: Syria, Libya, Tunisia. Pick a Middle Eastern country that where would you like to live in the Middle East? And, I could tell you nowhere. Pick an African country. You know what I mean? There's no shortage of examples, but things do establish themselves even in the worst places where there's mass genocides and stuff. And that's the other thing you have to factor in is the genocides. Is in a post-apocalyptic collapse again, gangs will probably be genocided by, like, call them hyper vigilantes or whatever. It'd be a different form of tribal and just gangs fighting each other. Again, things will balance out after a while. So it's just a different take on it, but I do think, yeah, there's a lot of points he makes in there that are really, really good. I just see a different spin on it. To me, I guess maybe living in the rural areas more, I could see the urban areas having a harder time. I could see the cities kind of going on in a different way. They become a little bit more rough, a little more violent and stuff like that, but they will still stay central trading hubs. The delivery of food and stuff like that would obviously change. So yes, you would see a change there. I think things become more local. So local, this neighborhood becomes its own. Instead of the people that moved out of that house now becomes a store. That lady down there becomes the knitter or the sewer, the cobbler, I guess is the whatever the term is there, seamstress, cobbler, or whatever, shoes and knitting and sewing jackets and whatever. Guy over there is the blacksmith. It does it in his backyard. So I think things like that will do that because again, most people like this bugging out idea, like unless your house is on fire or roving gangs are coming along. You can look at Argentina. Fernando from Modern Survivalist, he said, look, when Argentina collapsed, he goes, yeah, he says, the gangs, they didn't really rove. Yes, crime rate went up and stuff like that, but people didn't, pour out of the cities like you would think. They basically stayed in the cities. In fact, people came from the country and went into the cities because no jobs, no this, no that. But the thing is, the cities become overcrowded, and that's where you get your spike in crime rate. Again, a struggle for resources. But the other thing too is that the people that do stay in the rural areas, it's just they become more isolated. That's where the problem's there for them. So working on a strong community, gated communities will be a big thing. And anybody that's not, that's just kind of roaming around, kind of mindlessly by themselves, at some point get picked off. That's why stability is basically stationary. Moving is chaos. Stability is stationary. Hopefully you understand that concept, meaning if you find a community that's reasonable, you build that community. You don't keep moving on looking for another one. If you don't have to move, you don't move. You stay put. And stay put doesn't mean you stay in your house 24/7. It means, you stay within your boundaries, know where the tribal lines are. And tribal meaning where it's safe to go, where it's not safe to go. That's everything. So hopefully, this video makes a little bit of sense. But I'll put the link down below his video because I do like the stuff he puts out. It gave me a great idea for this video, and I thought it was a good idea because I didn't want to just completely double back on his video because he's already covered that, and I do agree. Yes, people will resort to whatever is necessary to survive in dire situation. You're in a burning car and your arm's pinned, you'll chew your arm off to get out. You know what I mean? Like you'll do whatever you have to do. We've seen this time and time again, in many examples. So that I don't question. Yeah, I agree with that. But I think how things remanifestate itself, I think just goes from utopic, what we know now, to dystopic. Just an alternate version of what we're already doing, just in a more miserable kind of way. Sounds fun. So anyway, I guess I'll leave it at that. So if you like this kind of content, please consider making a donation to the channel. Thank you very much to everybody who has. Rate, subscribe, share, and like. Take advantage of the comments. Maybe you think I'm off my rocker and I didn't get one thing right. Maybe you think, yeah, dude, you got it right. I don't know, whichever. But take advantage of the comments. That's one of the greatest things about YouTube and stuff like that is that you can actually interact. I love it from hearing from you guys. Even if I can't answer all your emails or get back to all your emails, I usually give everybody a yip or a thumbs up if I read it. Sometimes I can't get to them, but I still appreciate them. And plus, you talk amongst yourselves. I mean, that's this is like a discussion board. That's exactly what this is all about, is sharing the ideas. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. And Canadian Prepper, if you watch this, thanks for making the video. So gave me the idea for this video. If you want to respond to this one, fine. If not, that's fine. But I don't mind giving him the plug too, because he does a lot of good stuff too. Again, a lot of stuff he talks about, I think we're very like-minded on. I just tend to be a little bit more goofy about it than he is. But but another topic for another time. But anyway, enjoyed it anyway. So if I forget to put the link down below, remind me to put the link down below, because it was a really good video and I enjoyed it. So and then you can, maybe watch his first and then watch mine after, or vice versa, whatever. It might actually make more sense to watch his first, because then you'll understand what I'm kind of referring to getting back. So anyway, I guess I'll leave it at that. So be true to yourself, be true to others, and always do the right thing. Have yourselves a great day, eh? G'day, hi, and welcome. Alright, let's get into this. Okay, for a guy who says he's not a doomer, I do spend an awful lot of time talking about doom. Doom and gloom. Oh, all that fun stuff. Well, what can you do? Alright, Canadian Prepper did it again. He came out with a really good, thought-provoking video. I think it was called something like post-apocalyptic, the inner beast or something like that. I'll put a link down below if I can find it again. It was a good video. Like everything, even though him and I kind of take things from a different angle, he's a little more serious in tone than I am. I tend to goof around a little bit more, but I think there's a lot of stuff that we're very like-minded on, and like he says, he likes to hear different perspectives of things. So there's some things that I agreed with him in on that video 100%, and then some things that, well, maybe a different spin on it, maybe not necessarily disagree, but looking at it a different way, and that's the way I'm looking at it. Now, some of the stuff he talked about the fennel kids, that was a very good point to bring up and stuff like that. And other things talking about, how it'd be a breakdown of culture and then a rebuilding of tribalism. And I agree with that. There would be kind of I wouldn't say breakdown of culture. What I say is displacement of culture. Because if we look back in history, it almost plays out the same way all the time, where there's always a group that's kind of, they're affected, but they're not really affected. Things change, but it's like a dystopia rather than a utopia, where they're still going about their daily lives in the same places that they were, but everything's run down, and times got harder, but their lifestyle, it hasn't really got any worse, but it hasn't really got any better. And then other place, these would be like second world countries, for example. Other places, it goes complete Mad Max, and like most of the planet right now, most people live in a Mad Max type of apocalyptic world. If you live in the Middle East, you live in the apocalypse. You know what I mean? It's just, but yet, for example, we'll use Syria as a perfect example. There are still places in Syria where you could probably still vacation, believe it or not. You know what I mean? As crazy as things are going on there. So one side of the country might be completely in shambles, and the other side, although I don't recommend vacationing in Syria at this current time, but you get the idea. So, different people get affected different way. I don't think we'll ever, no matter what the circumstance, it would have to be an extremely bizarre circumstance to see total 100% societal collapse. And here's why. A societal collapse at large in mass numbers, definitely. Been done. Argentina's collapsed, what, 4 times in the past 5 years? There you go, societal collapse in a nutshell. But yet things still kind of hold together. People don't necessarily go off the deep end. Other places, that Tunisia in 2009, it's collapsed. Well, Tunisia is still on fire. You know what I mean? So different places will be affected differently. We also have to look at what the definition of what collapse actually is. If we're talking total societal collapse, taking it to the extreme, That means you don't even communicate with your own family. For whatever reason, everybody is on their own. It's like, think of it like a gigantic etch a sketch. Everybody's picked up, shooken, and just dropped off in the middle of disarrayment and bizarro world, and surrounded by Mad Max and weird, weird tribalism and stuff like that. Uh, for that to happen, again, smaller communities will tend to tighten up right away. We can use a lot of stuff out of medieval history to see how the world may progress. For example, people usually inside the castle walls live almost either if unless you're under a really brutal dictator, they usually live some sort of a small, very close knit type renaissance. If we look at castle to castle, if you're under was it Edward the Long Knives or Richard the Long Knives, or James the Long, I can't remember which king it was that was so brutal in England. Anyway, he was just a complete utter, and there was a few of them that it's like you couldn't get outside the castle walls. That said, for most places, again, inside the castle walls, whatever metaphor you want to use, that be small town, small community, whatever kind of wherever that moat kind of keeps people in together. I think things like that pull together right away. You could almost call that planting the seed of tribalism. Example: Ice Storm, 2008, or sorry, 1998. Everybody in my town pulled together. People went and checked up on the elderly, stuff like that. Now, food collapse, that might be a different story. Now, his theme was more along the lines of, who cares how we really get there, but when we get there, what are you capable of? What are you going to do? And he did bring up some experiments that I had talked about before of what people would be willing to do and how easy it is to manipulate people into doing things that, well, the point is that we already do that now. Like, I mean, you think government soldiers and stuff like that go to another country because somebody told them, well, our leaders told us these people are bad, so we have to go kill them. And they don't question it. You know what I mean? So like we're already doing that. It's a different, again, utopia versus dystopia. It's kind of a frame of mind when you really think about it. It's all dystopic to pick your soldiers up and put them into another country and just start slaughtering people in the name of insert ism or whatever form of aggression it is. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day. Arguing the semantics of being eaten by an alligator or a crocodile when you only need to focus on is that you're being eaten. And a lot of people do get kind of caught up on that. And history does kind of show that it's always the same thing. Huge flourishing society typically takes about 80 years to flourish. Once it flourishes, it starts its rapid descent into either economic failure. This goes from Rome right on to now. And what ends up happening is at some point when the economy gets so bad, you go to war somewhere. Now, the question is, do you go to war with your own people? Or does your nation pick up a war against a neighboring state or what have you? That type of thing. But the real thing, that recipe doesn't really matter because the point is you're going to go to war, which is against what, So that's the theme. That's the lineage of of doom, so to speak. It kind of works in that kind of manner. So that type of thing. Yeah, I guess we kind of agree there. Where I think we kind of disagree is